Next up, we're going to have a demonstration by the Historical European Martial Arts Club, which is my club. So a little bit about that. We're going to give a demonstration of 3 different weapons, those being the Dagger, the Messer, which is a German word for knife, but the Germans have no sense of proportion, so they call this a knife. It's a little bigger than my kitchen knife, but not by much. And then lastly, the Longsword, which is what most people probably see the most in movies. A little bit of background: the Historical European Martial Arts Club has been around here for almost 4 years now. I founded it when I came to TUJ. I serve as an instructor at Daggers European Martial Arts School in Santa Clara. And so when I came here, I wanted to keep doing that. So I thought, what better way to do that than to start a club? So helping me here today, I have Hannah Peters and Alex Mariko, who are going to help me demonstrate the things that we're doing. If you're interested, please, enjoy our demonstration. If you're not, please just avoid walking into the area where we're swinging weapons around, because that ends poorly for everyone. I'm going to have to put the mic down for the rest of this, so if you're interested, come a little bit closer and listen to the sound of my voice. And I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you. So the first weapon that we're going to talk about today is the Dagger. And the Dagger is carried by pretty much anyone in medieval Europe. The specific kind of dagger that we're using is called a rondel dagger. And it's not a very cutty dagger. It was not used for many cutting tools. It was not used as a slashing weapon. It is specifically a piercing weapon, generally carried by soldiers, usually meant to go through various kinds of armor, such as thick padded armor called gambesons, chainmail, you can punch through with this, and even some plate mail, the kind you might see fully armored knights riding on horseback wearing. That kind of armor is very difficult to punch through, so in general what you want to do is you want to throw somebody down on the ground and then start stabbing them with your dagger to do that. As I mentioned, it's not a very cutty, slashy dagger. It's very different to the kind you would find on the Indian subcontinent or the later Navaja daggers that were used for dueling in Spain later in the 15 and 1600s. So most of the attacks and most of the techniques that this particular weapon uses are focused on stabbing attacks. And in medieval Europe, the most common stabbing attack was somebody basically coming in and trying to put approximately 18 inches of sharp steel inside your body somewhere where you generally didn't want to, like so. I'll demonstrate quickly. So our targets with this kind of dagger are usually for the body, all right? If they're wearing some degree of armor protection, you might go for the eyes, or again, if she stabs me again, if I'm super lucky, all right, I can come around and stab her in the back of the head, all right, up under the armpit, all right, all these places where she has joints and she doesn't have that much protection, all right. So the most common, the first play, as it is called, in a book written in 1409 by an Italian man named Fiore de Liberi. The first play he shows for defending against the dagger opens as such. So as the attack comes in from above, you step back and you bring your arm up here into what he refers to as long guard in his grappling system. Right? From here he shows a number of different ways to deal with the situation. The simplest being just to bring your hand back down and strike them in the face, all right, which works pretty well. You can also stab again. Ooh, I'm not gonna get hit here. This way, again, all right. Same thing. Bring it down, take it away, stab them with their own dagger, which is fun and humiliating, but it's also polite, because when you take something from someone, you always need to remember to give it back when you're done. All right? All right? Now, Another really useful one is attack again, right? So I open here in long guard, all right? And without grabbing the blade of the dagger, because either maybe it's not a rondelle, maybe it's sharper and I'm not wearing gloves, or I have other reasons I just don't want to grab it, I can again pull it down here, all right, and grip and just jam it into her neck like that, which is a really useful skill, very important. Because at the end of the day, it means that my fingerprints are not on this dagger. Right? Medieval forensics was a lot more advanced than you might imagine, so something to avoid. Now, when Fiore writes his book and explains how to do these different techniques, he always writes an opening play, techniques you can do from that play, as we've just demonstrated a couple different ones, and then counters to that play. For example, the counter that he writes for the first play is simply for the attacker to bring their other arm into play on the dagger, like so. I go to long guard, she brings her other hand in, because I can't lift both of her hands up, and just stabs me in the stomach. Right? So, again, I go because I think, oh, I've got this, I know how to defend, so I go here, and this doesn't work as well for me. Alright? So bad things. And you'll see that that play defends against everything that I just demonstrated. So, in a way, it is a counter to everything. It is counter to everything that the first play does. Now, Fiore also generally writes what he refers to as remedies, which are counters to counters. And in a lot of medieval fencing manuals, you don't get much further than a counter to a counter. Because otherwise you get to a counter to a counter to a counter to a counter, and you really just can't, fights don't go on that long. You usually might have up to 6 or so engaged movements, and then either somebody is dead, or you will back away and try again. Right? So the counter that he writes for this play, and indeed the counter to many of his plays, is to simply push the elbow, all right? Which looks like so. So we're going to go step by step. She comes in with the attack, I go to long guard. She brings her arm up there, and push the elbow this way. And then I can do all sorts of fun things like that. All right? Yep. Up again. So one more time, just a little bit more smoothly. All right? So we're here, I go here, right? Or if I'm not feeling particularly charitable, right? Here. I'll pull out my own dagger and stab her several times with that. Okay? There, actually just a couple more things, just really quick. He also has a section that's really fun on dagger versus dagger. The dagger is often used in this manuscript more as a wrestling tool than simply a stabbing tool. So, for example, he shows when in armored fighting, and in armor, you're not worried about slashes like this. You're more worried about stabs that are coming in either to the face or to the armpit. Strong downward strikes like this. So you'll grasp the dagger in both hands like this, for example. Alright, so go ahead and stab. Alright, and I can step aside here, and by bringing the handle down inside here, again, I get back into that, I can stab her repeatedly in the neck kind of thing. Or a similar position if I cross both hands over on the dagger here. And the fun thing is this works with a dagger, it works with a stick, it works with a short umbrella. You can use it with pretty much anything that's about this long. Alright? Go here, roll it over, and grip again, and then just throw them down on the ground. And stab them in the ear. Always stab them in the ear. It's very important. Alright? So that's a little bit of some of the dagger stuff that we do in our club. The most common strikes, as I mentioned, are the kind that come down from above. There are also plays against thrusts underneath. Fiore does not deal specifically with these cuts as much because they were not as commonplace. And also, I don't care how many times you cut me if I'm wearing chainmail. I really don't. Go for it. I will be punching your face in while you do this. Right? So that's our section for today on the dagger. Any questions about dagger so far? No? Okay. So So the next weapon that we're going to talk about is a little bit bigger, and it's called the Messer, which is German for knife. And as I said, it's a little big for a knife, but you know, it works very well. So thank you very much. Okay. So for Messer, I'm going to have Hannah help me with this one. So this is referred to as a Messer. There are very similar weapons. This one is a German weapon. There's a similar weapon called a Falchion. It's usually a Norman, an English weapon. Very similar in construction. The only real difference is that this little thumb guard here is flat on a Falchion. The techniques that we're going to show here are from a gentleman called Talhofer, who wrote his book, I believe in early 1500. It could be late 1400. I don't remember at the moment. I really like this weapon. It's watching videos on techniques for this weapon is one of the things that really got me into the stuff that I do today. Predominantly because when you watch movies, right, and they sword fight, it always looks like this. Like, go ahead and cut my head. All right? And it's just, you know, you know, things like this. Everything is just this weird blade movement, and it goes over and over and over like that. The first play I ever saw with this weapon throws all that out the window and goes straight from a sword strike to a grapple. All right? And that play looks like this. It's meant to defend yourself against a blow that's coming overhead into your skull. All right? So, would you go ahead and throw the cut of meat for this one? And so it shows bringing the blade up and stepping into it, and then wrapping over their wrist, right? And then you can hit them as much as you want, and they're not going to be able to do a whole lot. And a lot of people ask, like, well, you're pulling this blade against yourself, aren't you going to get cut? Again, I'll go back to the fact that it was very cold in medieval Europe. You're often wearing very thick clothing. And also, who here has ever used a steak knife to cut steak? Or to cut anything, really? You've used one? Have you ever taken a steak knife and put it on top of the steak and then just push down really hard? Yeah, nothing happens, all right? I'm not concerned as long as I'm holding this to my body and it's not going anywhere. Now, if it starts going back and forth, bad things happen. But if you just grab it in place and hold it, you don't have a whole lot to worry about. Again, Talhofer also writes his book with counters to counters. So, for example, a similar play that involves, rather than grappling at the elbow, rather than grappling at the wrist, is meant to grab at the elbow and then throw somebody over, which is, let's see, if I strike this way, let's go ahead and change sides here so that I don't run into a wall. It's a very similar play. The difference is when Hannah grapples, she's going to grab behind my elbow rather than in my wrist. So here I come in with this strike, grabs elbow, and then throws that. Now that's no fun for me. Alright, I don't like being thrown on the ground, at least not when someone's trying to hit me with a giant oversized knife. Especially if they're German. Like, Germans are the worst. Alright? So Talhofer shows a counter to this play. And again, if you think back to the Dagger play, right, the counter to this one-handed technique, right, was to bring your other hand into play. So that's what I'm going to do similarly for Talhofer. I'm going to throw my attack. As she wraps her arm around here and goes for that grab, I'm just going to push my button here, right? And now either I can throw her down against the ground here. I mean, this is also an excellent bargaining position. From here we can have a discussion about transfer of valuables to my account in Italy, all right? This is a very good position to be in, all right? Thank you very much. You also see some of what is called half sorting, and we'll talk about that a little bit more with the longsword, even in the Messer. So similarly to how I grabbed it earlier here, right? This is a very common technique in European martial arts for a couple of reasons. One, you're often wearing gloves when you're fighting, right? And two, these blades, while they're sharp, they're not a whole lot sharper than a butter knife. And again, as I said, if I grab, all right, and I'm not just sitting here slicing my fingers on purpose, I'm not going to get cut. I've actually seen there's a fantastic video on YouTube by a gentleman who goes by the name of Scarlet Rim, and he has a video of taking a sharpened sword, probably much sharper than they would have had back then. One hand, second hand, and he takes a tire pallet. All right, basically like a tire swing that doesn't move, and he just goes at it repeatedly, stabbing it as hard as he can, and he's getting, this far into a piece of thick tire rubber, and his hand's just a little red from gripping so tight. It's not cut at all. So this is a perfectly valid tactic. The next play we're going to show I like because there are two really good ways to use it, depending on how much you like the person or how valuable they are. We'll talk about value of people with the longsword. So go ahead and throw a cut to my face. So if she's not very valuable, all right, so I'm down here, and then I can just stab her in the throat. All right. Easy and done, all right? Problem solved. But if she's a noble, all right, she's probably worth some money. So I probably want to not kill her instantly and maybe take her captive and ransom her back to her family for a lot of money. So I'm going to use a very similar technique, except instead of stabbing her in the throat, I'm going to hook her with this section of the blade and sweep my leg in behind her. So same play. All right, here, hook this foot behind here, and throw her down on the ground. And from there, we can again discuss bargaining positions and how much her family's willing to pay to, get her back. All right. Let's see, how do we want to do this? Actually, I can have both of you guys work with me on this one. So. Thank you for helping with the mess with me. Alex, if I can have you come help me with some longsword stuff really quickly. So, this is probably one of the most recognizable weapons in medieval European martial arts. There are a bunch of different names for it. Some of them are more correct than others. You will see it called a longsword, a hand and a half sword, because you can use it in one hand, certainly, all right? But if you really want some extra power, you can bring in two hands, all right? Sword of War, Great Sword is another one. I personally like Great Sword. Can anyone guess why this might be a great sword? Yes, exactly that. More specifically, it is my sword. This particular one, the wooden weapons that we use and the rubber weapons that we use are what are referred to as wasters. They are training tools for European martial arts. They're made out of wood, much the same way that most training weapons in many feudal and medieval martial arts are made out of wood, because it's cheaper. Not because it's safer. I don't know if any of you have ever been hit with a baseball bat, but your chances are not a whole lot better if I smash you in the face with one of these than if I do so with a steel sword. They hurt when we spar and when we fence. We wear fencing masks, heavy padded jackets, and gloves that help protect us.
And I'm like, do you see this?
But yeah, it's not because they're safer, it's just because they're so much cheaper. I like this one in particular because there are only two of these in the world. One belongs to me and one belongs to a collector. This is modeled after a steel sword that I have back home, and yeah, it's very nice. So, with the longsword, how many weapons does it look like I'm holding? Any guesses? One. Any other guesses? Nope. Two? Two is another good guess? So the answer we usually give is three. There are three very distinct different ways in which a longsword can be used. Right now, obviously, the first one, a sword, is fan-bloody-tastic if you are having a day out slaughtering those uprising, annoying little peasants. All right? You just hit them in the body and they go down. They're not wearing much armor. It's really easy to cut through their stuff. All right? It's really good. I can kill peasants all day long with this. The problem is if I come across, you know, somebody who's actually wearing armor, maybe they were a guard, or heaven forbid, another knight. Right? Now that runs into a problem because I can hit her in the head all day long. Right? Alright, and if she's wearing steel armor, none of this is going to do anything other than probably make her mad at me. Alright? So if I can hit her and it's not going to do anything, then I need to switch to my second weapon, right? Which is by grabbing my sword just about here in what is called half swording. We did a little bit of this earlier with the messer, right? I turn my sword into basically one of these. All right, and I can use it in all of the same ways that I might use the dagger that I'm probably carrying on my belt. So I can use it to stab into the eye socket. I can use it to stab up under where her helmet attaches. If I can get behind her, I can stab her in the butt, where there's usually not a lot of protection. And why might I stab her in the butt other than that it's funny? It has to do with the last thing we did with the messer. Remember? Alright? If she's wearing armor, alright, armor is expensive. I don't know if you've looked, but even nowadays, a good set of armor can cost $3,500 to $7,500 US. Alright? And if she can afford that, she can probably afford more, and her family can probably afford more. And if I stab her in the butt, she's probably not going to die, but she's not going anywhere soon. So I can drag her back with me to my castle where she will live with me until her family pays to take her back. All right? Or, as has occasionally happened in history, her family says, she's just a child, we can always make another one. Which sucks for her, but, you know, whatever. So I might switch to this dagger, all right? And here we end up in a lot of wrestling technique. So, for example, if we're here, all right, and we're both actually grabbing each other, right? If we're here and we're both trying to stab each other, all right, the common targets are the eyes, all right? But if she's standing in this position, I can't really get to her eyes. She's got those pretty well covered. Right? Because as soon as I come up here, she's just going to slide that point forward into my eyes. Right? And bad things happen for me. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step to the side and I'm going to try and stab her in the armpit. All right? Because the armpit is where you don't have a lot of armor. Anywhere there is a joint that needs to move, there is less armor. Now, let's go ahead and switch around this way. She probably has the same idea for me. And in fact, from this position, that's one of the best things you can do. So she's going to step around this way and try and stab me right in the joint there. And that's a bad day for me. Now, I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to, as she steps in, I'm going to turn my sword over here. All right? Setting this offline so she can no longer get to my armpit. And then, as a response to her audacity of trying to stab me in the armpit, I'm going to bring the handle of my weapon, called the pommel, up under her elbow, and then back down on top of her arm, and push her onto the ground. Where again, we can go over the terms of how much money her family wants to pay. Because, like I said, armor is expensive, and she's probably hit my armor several times, and I'm going to have to pay to get that fixed. It's like a car accident. You have to talk about, you know, whose fault is it, who's paying who. It's very important. All right? So that's a little bit of using the longsword in armor. The last weapon is, again, maybe I come in for this perfect strike at her eyes, and she just steps back out of the way. Well, I don't want to waste all that momentum and all that energy, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hand off the handle, grab down here, and drive what are called the quillets, that's this bit, into her face and into her head. Basically turning this into my third weapon, which is a hammer. Right? There's very little chance that this is going to go through a nice steel helmet. there is a considerably higher chance that one of these is going to puncture through even a good steel helmet, or at least put a big enough dent in there that, like, does anybody here like jelly? I like jelly. And that's what's going to happen to her head if I hit it hard enough with one of these. It doesn't even matter. I don't have to hit it just with this. I can catch her right here, and it's going to be just as bad for her. I can also hook around the neck and use it as a tool to pull her down to the ground. And again, stab her in the butt as she goes. It's a very multi-purpose tool, which is why I like this weapon so much. But a large part of it, outside of fighting in armor on the battlefield, was unarmored dueling. And so Hannah's going to help me talk about that one a little bit, and I'll show you a couple of plays for that. Any questions so far? Well, I still have my voice. No? Okay. Thank you very much. Go ahead and hand that one off to Hannah. All right. So the unarmored use of the longsword is very similar to the armored use, except that there is more of a focus on striking with the blade than there is thrusting into weak points. So for example, if she throws what's called a fendente, or a tooth breaker, which is in Fiore's system our very basic downward strike at my face, she's aiming to hit right about here, and if she puts enough force into it, that sword will stop probably about where my teeth are. So go ahead and strike. I'm not going to do anything, so please be nice. Right. Extend. Good. She's going to be hitting you right about here, which would not be comfortable for her. So, in order to avoid that, I'm going to do something very simple. I'm just going to raise my sword. Let's see. I'm going to raise it, into what's called a window guard.
I mean, I don't have
strike.
no point of me saying it.
Right? I'm just going to bring it up here. Now here, I protected myself, and her sword is stuck here. I'm going to continue that advantage, all right, by pulling my pommel more out this way. I'm bringing my blade on line with her face, all right? Her point's still up here. It's not very much a threat to me, and I can just slide this straight forward into her face with very little danger to myself. Right? I could also go into a number of drills that set strikes aside and then follow in with my own. So for example, I could be down here and she comes in with the same strike. Set it aside and then come down with a strike of my own. Or more likely I'm going to come down on top of her hands because that's a little bit more humiliating. Alright. And of course we run into, there's also grappling and disarms with this kind of weapon. We don't have a lot of time to get into that for today's presentation. But for those of you who stuck around and watched, thank you very much. I believe the music club has another performance on after we are done here, so please stick around for that. And if you have any further questions, feel free to approach either myself or any one of my club members. And if you want to come check the club out, we meet on Monday and Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. in the second floor cafeteria. Thank you very much.
Yay, very good job, Jake. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.